It'd be good for us to have a black woman as president for the first time in history.
Yeah.
But my vote's kind of still on Trump.
If there's one thing I absolutely hate about the media when they cover a presidential election is when they stick kids in front of the camera and ask them their opinion of the candidates, because you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a regurgitation of what they hear at home from their parents. That said, as much as I hate these segments, CNN, I think, accidentally actually uncovered something very important about what kids are seeing at home from their parents, specifically whether their parents are Democrats versus Republicans. Take a look.
The study found that Republican-leaning kids were more open to visiting a Democrat-supporting household. The Democrat-leaning kids were about 5 times more likely to say they would not want to go to a pro-Trump house.
Would they be okay with you going over to somebody's house who is really supportive of President Trump?
No,
No. And why not?
because they know that he's not like black people, so they will not be happy to see me.
Would your family let you go over to somebody's house who's really supportive of Donald Trump?
No,
No, they wouldn't.
no,
And why not?
because like my mom and dad don't like Donald Trump at all, not a single bit.
Would you be okay going over to somebody's house whose family really likes Kamala Harris?
I think it'd be fine. It's just about the personality of the people.
Wow. Chris DeGaulle, the kids are okay, but apparently the parents are not. And I found this to be incredibly revealing. I'd love for your commentary on this, especially considering you deal through the Herzog Foundation and your work with them about education and school issues with private schools and public schools. Because I think what you're seeing reflected here with parents is also reflected with teachers, sadly, in the government-run schools.
Yeah. This notion that you have to hate the person that doesn't vote like you seems to go just one way. And even Anderson Cooper, in setting that piece up, if you watched it in its entirety, he set it up in sort of a sullen way where he had to admit that it seems Democrat homes are overwhelmingly the ones that are teaching their kids, oh, no, we don't fraternize with those Trump people. It's disgusting, quite frankly. And while, my kids certainly know my political preferences, I never brought them up to think that we can't socialize, fraternize, worship with, shop with, hang out with Democrat voters. What a sad thing. And yes, when you're talking about the schools, now you have armies of teachers and teachers unions who now have that same ideology and undoubtedly make students who come from homes that disagree feel unwelcome in the schools. Yeah, it's why homeschooling is exploding. It's why Christian schools are exploding. It's why pod schools and micro schools are exploding in growth. People want alternatives, and people want away from this toxic mentality that if you don't agree with them, you've got to be silenced and blackballed from the community.
Yeah, it was a powerful segment. And Akash, reflected in the relatively innocent eyes of these 10-year-olds, you saw the very real intolerance of those who call themselves quite tolerant. In fact, they pat themselves on the back about how tolerant they are. I know that the gut instinct is, well, that's because politics has become too much about cultural issues and things like that. But when we were debating just government spending, the Democrats were showing us Paul Ryan throwing a grandma off of a cliff, and we were told that Republicans are willing to let children starve in the streets if we don't fund school lunch programs from Washington, D.C. So there is really kind of a pattern of toxic politics here that isn't bipartisan, I don't think.
No, that's exactly right. I think I would add to Chris's point. It seems to be cutting across several generations now. It's the parents. We've seen polls like this of college students, right? That they can't be friends with somebody who's a Republican and that they shouldn't be welcome to speak freely on college campuses. And then you've got, these 8, 9, 10-year-old kids who are reflecting what they get from their parents. And I think, honestly, Larry, the scariest part is it may not even be true, right? That their parents may not actually ever stop them from being friends with a kid who's a Republican. But the fact that kids even think that, and that's what they're picking up from their parents, is, I think, even scarier, right? Which is that these parents are being that outrageously politicized inside their own homes that the kids are making assumptions like this. It's either an assumption or it's factually true. I'm not sure which one is scary. And I think the other thing I would add on here, for anyone who would defend this by saying, oh, it's because of the Trump era, it's because of the Trump era, it's not because of the Trump era. I think they obviously very uniquely despise Donald Trump to extreme levels. But to your point, they said this about Mitt Romney. They said this about Paul Ryan. There was an article the other day that Trumpism started under Reaganism, right? And folks said this about Reagan. It's become this sweeping party thing where all Republicans are so evil. You can't do any kind of interaction with them. That only goes in one direction. It cuts across several generations of Democratic voters. I think it's so unhealthy for the country. It's so unhealthy for kids. And I think it, frankly, again, it won't ever be called out by the mainstream media who is complicit in it, but it should be called out by Republicans because I think it's correct and it makes them more likable, more appealing to normal people who don't live their lives that way.
Yeah, and by the way, credit should go to CNN. I mean, I don't think this is the story they were expected to get when they went down this road, but good for them for airing it. I think it is thought-provoking. Matt Foley, my favorite display at the Reagan Ranch Center in Santa Barbara, it's run by Young America's Foundation, not the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, but at the Reagan Ranch Center. There's a big display of all of the media coverage of Ronald Reagan back in the early 80s. And I kid you not, you look at those headlines, you look at the reports from the network news stations. There were only 3 networks at the time back then. And it looks exactly like the kind of stuff they are saying about Trump right now. This is not a new phenomenon. I think what's new is how children are now being brought into these conversations, and they're being told those people are not just wrong, those people are evil.
I think that Reagan would have benefited a lot from having the roundtable around in that area. And I think that, to date myself a little bit here, I'm old enough that I was in college when Trump was elected in 2016. And I remember I posted on Facebook because I used Facebook then. Now, I guess people still use Facebook. But I wrote on election night or the next morning, whenever it was obvious that Trump had won, a quote from Thomas Jefferson that's cliche, but I think very accurate. I never considered a difference of opinion in politics, in religion, and philosophy as cause for withdrawing from a friend. I think that's a very American belief. Now, obviously, Jefferson had a lot of enemies. When he and John Adams died on the same day, July 4th, John Adams's last words were, "Jefferson still lives." Thomas Jefferson had his enemies, okay? But that doesn't mean that he couldn't at least respect these people. Now, of course, what happened immediately after I posted this, these liberals that I went to college with said, "Well, I can't believe that you're okay with my genocide, and, you're a horrible person. I'm unfriendly." I didn't even say anything about Trump at all. I could have been supporting Jill Stein and post that, right? But, I ran college Republicans. I was a Republican elected official. It's obvious sort of that I'm a Republican there. And then they were hell-bent on proving this right. So this segment, I think, is actually kind of sad for children to say, as Akash said, whether that's true or not, that their parents would not be okay with them being friends with people of different opinions. And these kids were in New Jersey and Texas, right? We're not talking in D.C., in the D.C. suburbs where so much is about politics. This is just random places, where they could easily be Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump supporters, whatever. And you go over and you talk about football and you talk about, like the great Navy game we saw last week. You talk about normal things.
Yeah.
This is, I think, very concerning. And I would say it's both. Childish is the wrong word to act like this, because I just think it's an un-American way of interacting with people to say, oh, based on who you vote for. I don't think any of us would cut someone off from our life because they voted for Kamala Harris.
Right.
Based on who you vote for, I can't be friends with you. That would tear America apart if, it becomes more systematic.
No, it's a great point. And I'd like to think that we can turn this around, frankly, because we can't survive if we're like this, honestly. And you're right. This isn't childish. It's the opposite of childish. Children don't act this way. As Rogers and Hammerstein said in South Pacific, you have to be taught. You have to be carefully taught. But there was a glimmer of hope in this segment. Let's look at this. It's a very quick cut. Take a look.
It'd be good for us to have a black woman as president for the first time in history.
Yeah.
But my vote's kind of still on Trump.
Chris Stegall, I really want to see some hope here, and I want to hope that we can get beyond this. I almost feel like coming out of the segregationist era and some of the religious intolerance that we've seen in America, the only thing that ultimately sort of helped mend that was mixed marriages. You started to see multiracial families and multi-denominational families, Protestants marrying Catholics and Catholics marrying Jews. I almost feel like that's what needs to happen here. We need to start having mixed marriages politically so that people can get over this.
That little girl and what she just said is the scariest sentence the left can hear. It terrifies them to see a young black girl thinking and saying the things that the great Martin Luther King Jr. said. That is the personification of content of character means more than color of skin, or I'd add gender. That little girl, we need millions more like her, and she's the worst enemy of the Democrat Party right now, to be perfectly honest.
Well said. And here on the roundtable, she's our person of the week. Let's let that be the last word.